is Murder in the Rain, where each week Emily Rowney, Alicia Holland, and Josh McCullough tell true crime stories of the Pacific Northwest. Murder in the Rain contains graphic content. Listener discretion is advised. Last week, I spoke about perpetrator, rapist, and murderer Bruce Bradley Bushey. This week, we aren't talking about him, but about his victims, Barbara and her son, Patrick. In different ways, Barbara and Patrick both lost their lives to the same man. Today, I'll talk with Patrick about what he remembers of his mother and the chaos surrounding her death. He'll talk about how it shaped the way he reacted as a teen and how he has turned into a helper as an adult. I would like to start by thanking Patrick, not only for reaching out and taking the time to be interviewed about such an emotionally heavy subject, but for trusting me to tell his mother's story. It is truly an honor, and it's really the purpose of why we do the show. So thank you, Patrick. Something I've learned in our 5 years of doing all of this is that truth is very finicky, if it even exists. You'll hear Patrick tell parts of his mother's story today that conflict with what I shared last week. First of all, it is his story. So if that information is what he was told or what he remembers from all that time ago, that's fine. Secondly, we have seen more than enough examples of incompetency when it comes to interviews and reports that it's possible things got slightly jumbled. I just want to clear that up. I don't want someone to hear Patrick talking about the firefighters finding his mother's car and get upset that the report said it was Dean. Maybe they did see it as they left, or maybe they told Patrick this information later. We just don't know. So I'm just asking for everyone to have some patience, give some grace, and have understanding. What matters aren't the exact details. What matters is Barbara and Patrick and their story. I started by asking Patrick about his childhood and what he knew of his mother's life, not just once she was his mother, but her life before children, before she was the target of a violent crime. Hi, Patrick. I'm so sorry to have to meet under such circumstances, but again, I appreciate that you're wanting to share your mother's story. After all these years, I'm sure it's still very difficult and emotional to talk about.
It is, but I feel, especially how you guys tell the story, I think it's going to be very therapeutic getting it out there and getting the awareness out there. And I've always said the best thing I can do for her is to let her live through memories and through actions that I do. I've done some unofficial community work, reaching out to people that were victims of violent crimes and just sitting with them and being somebody that can listen to them. And we're all in the same place. Unfortunately, it just hit too close to home this week. One of our neighbors were murdered. And I've reached out to his wife that when she's ready, if she wants an ear to talk to, I'm here. It's horrible. Some guy's dumping garbage, and he was on his morning walk, asked him not to dump garbage, and they drove over him and killed him on their way out, 300 feet from his front door. And we live in a very rural area where we're an hour and a half from Seattle, right, tucked up at the base of Mount Rainier. If you look on a map and find Enumclaw, we're about 15 minutes outside of Enumclaw. We live a mile and a half up a gravel road. So having something like that happen in this little community is like, yeah, it's nobody can really put our heads around it right now.
The man Patrick was referencing was Nicholas Vallison. On September 21st of last year, Nick left his home at 7:20 a.m. for his morning walk with Nanook, his dog. His wife was leaving at the same time, and as she got to the bottom of their neighborhood hill, she saw something out of place. It was a U-Haul truck. Tanny, Nick's wife, called him and a neighbor asking that they go inspect the situation. This may seem like an unexpected reaction, but there had been issues in the area related to illegal dumping, and this looked to be what was taking place. Nick heeded his wife's call and changed direction, heading for the U-Haul's location. A woman, Alyssa Montano, was connected to Andrew Ralph Boehm. She told police that Andrew stated he needed to get to Ravensdale. He had parked a U-Haul there with a bunch of stuff that I can only assume was stolen or the property from the stolen U-Haul in the back that he wanted to go through. So Alyssa, Andrew, and a second man, Bart McMurray, drove their vehicles, including the U-Haul and a Dodge pickup, to a secluded place, the end of the hill. As they were going through the truck, there was a banging on the side wall. It was Nick. As they all encountered each other, Nick asked them what they were doing. He also informed them police had been called and were en route. Because this case is still active and so new, it's unclear if Andrew was already sitting in the driver's seat of the U-Haul as a prepared getaway driver, or if he moved into that position once Nick arrived, or if he was in the U-Haul and then moved to his pickup. But as the conversation got heated, Andrew started his pickup truck and began revving the engine in hopes it would make Nick leave. It didn't work. Tanny, Nick's wife, started calling his cell to see how it was going, but he didn't answer. Again and again, no answer. Worried, she turned back after dropping their daughter off at school and returned home. But before she could get there, she came upon a grisly scene. Her husband, in the road, dying from severe head injuries and blunt force trauma. It had been reported that while Nick was confronting the group, he tried to move a log into the road to hinder their ability to leave. In doing so, he wound up standing in front of the other vehicle that was there, the Dodge pickup. As Nick stood in front of the truck, he faced Andrew in the driver's seat and put his hands on the hood. One can imagine there may have been an exchange of words. As the confrontation went on, something led to Nick falling down. The second he did, Andrew, without hesitation, according to Alyssa, drove over Nick. The neighbor that had been called pulled up just as the event was happening. The three perpetrators all got into the pickup and took off. 911 had already been called and the police were on their way. More calls for help were made and medics arrived. They found Nick in the road, unresponsive due to massive head injuries. And that was the scene Tanny pulled up on, her husband being pronounced dead at the scene after she asked him to shoo away some riffraff. One of the last things he said to her that morning was, "I think this is the last time I will wear these shoes because they have 625 miles on them." Since the perpetrators had been strangers in the neighborhood, there was an urgent search for who could have committed such a senseless act. Interviewing witnesses, it was reported a black or dark gray older Dodge Ram had been seen speeding through the area around the time of the murder. It didn't take long for detectives in the area to find the U-Haul. It was only 50 yards away in a wooded area surrounded by items and garbage. That afternoon, the U-Haul was reported stolen. Later that same day, calls came in about popping sounds and smoke in another wooded area just 5 miles from where Nick had been killed. A pickup was found, engulfed in flames. Enough was left behind after the fire was put out to learn that the truck had been stolen back in June, and it matched the description of the one seen fleeing the area. 2 days later, Andrew Boehm was arrested, but not for the murder, for failing to register as a sex offender, a different stolen vehicle case, and unrelated warrants. He was released on bond October 15th. It would take until November 15th for the detectives to piece together the stolen trucks, the paperwork, which included the names of who really rented the truck, and others showing Andrew's name, and other evidence which led to the arrest of 38-year-old Andrew Boehm. This case is ongoing, but Andrew, who was held on $4 million bail, has been charged with 2 counts of possession of a stolen vehicle, second-degree arson for setting the murder weapon on fire, and second-degree murder. We will keep you posted as the case develops. Patrick, if you can, I know you were so young and it was also traumatizing, but could you share what you remember of what happened the night your mother was taken from you?
So the news reports say she was unemployed, but the story I was always told growing up was she had just got off work. There was a Chinese restaurant about a mile down the road, and she'd gotten off work there, and she'd stopped at the Denny's, and the Denny's had a little tiny closet bar in the back room, and she'd stopped there for a drink on her way home. Reading through the news reports and everything you sent me, they called her unemployed, and they said that she was there on a date, but the stories I'd heard from the fire department, the firefighters that were there, is they were sitting at separate tables. Bushey left before her. She paid and left, and the firefighters were standing at the counter to pay on their way out. And there's that discovered the car and her purse and all that.
So your understanding is she left work that day and going to the Denny's was seen as a somewhat usual routine?
I don't know how usual it was because she'd been in and out of rehab a few times. So I don't remember her drinking a lot or stopping for drinks when I was young. or hearing stories. I think it was just the way my dad described it, a rough night.
Can you tell us any aspects of the case you remember or ones the perpetrator claimed?
He claims they were there on a date, and he claimed everything was consensual. That didn't track with anything I was ever told growing up. And I've tried for the last 5 years now to get a face to face with him. You've been dealing with the state of Washington. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do. And it was only the seven of them in the bar, from what I was told, and the bar, eight counting the bartender. It's a very small. I've stopped in there a few times. I don't know if I was just glutton for punishment. I used to go there every year on the anniversary and sit and have a drink. And it's, even to this day, it's a tiny little closet. And I can only imagine in 84 that it was probably even smaller, because not a lot of Denny's even have bars in them anymore. Had it not been for I believe it was Auburn Fire Department, the day shift that was in the bar with her, they were actually paying their tab as she walked out ahead of them, and they're the ones that discovered her car. Had they not taken notice of the guy that was in the bar, it probably would have stayed going with the Green River Task Force, because he took very good steps to take her body to where they were finding the other bodies and make it look like Ridgway did it. The only thing that got him was, I think there was 5 firefighters that were in there, like, no, that doesn't sound right. Unless this guy is Green River Killer.
Since the Green River Killer was active for so many years, I asked Patrick what he knew of him.
After I was probably early teenage years, and it was all over the news. My grandma watched the 6 and 11 o'clock news like it was gospel. I'd always get ushered out of the room when they would talk about it. I knew of him. I didn't really know any details till I got older. And one of the articles, or one of the court case papers I was looking through, where they mentioned at first that the case had been assigned to the Green River Task Force. And I was like, well, what? Why? It wasn't him. I started reading more and found, oh, that's why.
Because Bruce had been released early after his conviction for the attack against 18-year-old Jeanette, which led to the murder of Barbara, her family pursued legal action. This led to a shocking decision, their adoption of Patrick. As years went on and conversations were avoided, Patrick took it upon himself to learn the truth about what happened to his mother.
They did win a lawsuit from the state. I don't remember how much it was, because of how Bruce was let out early. They used that money to force my father into giving me up for adoption. So they adopted me when I was, I think, 6, and I stayed in Packwood for the remainder of my life until I was 18. I would go to see my dad and stay with him and spend summers with him and stuff, but not full time. I hate speaking ill of the dead, but it was not handled very well. They never really discussed it with me. And I grew up in a town, Packwood I think we had 800 people growing up. Everybody knew. And you'd hear the people whisper and the people talk about me. And I'd hear people in town, that's the boy whose mom got killed. But nobody would talk to me about it. I didn't really find out a lot of information until I turned 18. And I drove to Seattle and I went to the Hall of Records and I sat down and scoured through all their microfiche. And I went from knowing nothing to seeing crime scene photos and coroner reports. And until then, I hadn't talked to my father about it really, because he wore his wedding ring until the day he died. He was still madly in love with her. And he used to say, even 30 years later, that he would wake up some nights and smell her on the pillow next to him. So I didn't ever want to bring it up. I mean, I figured I already had enough in his head. He survived Vietnam. I figured then he comes home to survive that. But once I knew too much and I went that total pendulum swing the other way, I finally started asking questions, and that's when I finally started learning. But I was an adult before I really knew the whole story, even half the story. When I went from knowing nothing to knowing everything, I slipped into horrible depression, substance abuse. I ran away from home, went and stayed with some friends that were part of a motorcycle club. Didn't talk to my dad for almost a year. Didn't talk to friends that I grew up with since kindergarten for over a year. I disappeared, and I was doing not horrible things, but not great things, not making great choices. And I remember I was I'd been stoned out of my mind for a couple days, and some stuff had gone on. And for whatever reason, it hit me at that moment that what I'm doing is dishonoring her legacy, and her memory. And it made me sit down and really dive deep into myself. I remember the night like it was yesterday. I got back on my motorcycle, and as fast as I left the little town of Packwood and disappeared, I got on my bike and headed straight back to Seattle. And I went to the courthouse the following week and had my name legally changed back to my birth name, had my grandparents removed from my birth certificate, and my mom and dad's name put back on it. And for my 18th birthday, well, it was just after my 18th birthday, I showed up after not really talking to my dad for a while, and I handed him my new driver's license and the copy of my new birth certificate. And that's when I started. I don't really know how to word it. In my mind, the way I've always told people is I made a choice to not be a victim and to be a survivor. That's when I started talking about it, talking about her life, her death, asking questions of my dad, and diving into the story of who she was as much as he would talk. I started doing some outreach work. Rode with some motorcycle guys that what we would do was escort abused women or children to court. They were scared that, they'd be facing the person that did this to them, and they were terrified. So we would give them a ride and escort them to the courthouse, and then we would sit in the front two rows right behind them to let them know that they were safe. So it was when 18 was, that year was a rough year. It was a big swing of a lot of things. And I guess the long-term side effect of it, from going to not really knowing anything to knowing too much, I've still never seen his face. They did not have the mugshot photos. So I still to this day, every once in a while, have the nightmare that I can see it happening, but he's just a figure with a black face. You can't see anything. And I'm always running and trying to get there. And it's like I'm running on a treadmill, and it rears up randomly and suddenly, and I might go 6 months or a year and never have it. And then something during a day or something in life will trigger a memory during the day, and then that night. And it's been the same since I was 18 years old. The dreams never changed.
Do you want to see his face to take away the mystery?
I do. I've been petitioning the court or the prison, trying to. I want to see him. I want to, either through Zoom or through the glass. I don't expect him to say anything. I don't know I would believe anything he would say anyways. Reading what he said in his police reports, he's lying about everything anyways. I don't think 39 years is going to make him change anything. But I want him to know more than anything that I'm okay. I survived. He did not kill my mom's spirit. He only killed her body. Her memories, her legacy, everything still lives. The only thing he did was park himself in jail for the rest of his life. And I've heard different reports. I believe he had a family at the time. I don't know that for 100% certainty. So all he did was remove himself from society by that act. I more so just want to see him to get what's been on my chest off. And I don't care if he says anything, but he's going to listen to what I have to say. And hopefully that puts the monster back in a cage, I guess is a good way to say it.
Would you like to hear from him? Do you think there's anything he could say that would be beneficial to you?
I mean, what do you say? I'm sorry. I don't think there's any pearl he could offer me. I mean, just like the neighbor that we lost, claiming drug addiction. That's not, so many people are addicted to drugs. They don't kill people. I'm a firm believer that if he wouldn't have got caught after my mom, he would have done it again and again and again. The person I really want to talk to most out of the whole deal is his first victim, actually.
Patrick explained that there have been holdups in trying to meet with Bruce. He was denied one visit because he was actually a witness in an active court case, so he couldn't go to a prison to talk to a prisoner. Then COVID hit. Patrick then started going through a Washington state advocacy group in an effort to meet with Bruce. The prison can't stop Patrick from attempting a visit with Bruce, but Bruce does not have to meet with him. In fact, if they end up with a scheduled visit, Patrick's understanding is all he has to do is come into the room and sit down, but if he wants to, Bruce can just stand up and walk away. Although Bruce's psychiatrist does think that he would be willing to speak with Patrick. Since no one had told Patrick what happened or even talked about emotions surrounding the loss, I asked him what he was told about the circumstances surrounding his mother's death when he was a child.
They bought me a book, my grandparents did, that was entitled, I think, Where Do People Go When They Die? Which when Credence died, they bought me the same book that said all dogs go to heaven. So that's how it was kind of explained to me. I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral. They said I was too young. They didn't want me to see it. They basically sheltered me from it as much as they could until I finally started getting old enough I could ask questions and start doing my own research and trying to figure it out. And this is before the internet. So I actually had to do the legwork. And as I got older, people would talk to me a little bit more and tell me what of the story they knew.
How long was it from the time your mother passed until you learned of her death?
I believe it was just a matter of days because I was staying with my grandparents for probably a weekend or a week, whatever it was that I was down there. And I would have been expecting her to come get me within a day or two. She was in Seattle. I think she was supposed to meet my father that night. They were back to talking again and trying to work through things. So I think she was heading back to his house or their house. From what I remember of the story, they sent me to go stay with my grandparents so they could talk things out and not have a 4-year-old pestering them and trying to get in the middle. And if there was an argument, my dad was not one to raise his voice or have air grievances around other people. So he wouldn't have wanted me in the room or in the house just in case there was an argument. I was staying with my grandparents for the weekend. I'm assuming that's why, so they could talk and be free.
As he said, it was once Patrick learned how his mother was killed and where she was left that it all started to make sense that the case would have been given to the Green River Task Force. I then asked Patrick if he knew the time difference between Barbara's death and when it was believed to be connected to the Green River killer. Again, this interview was conducted before I had the case records, so this is really more about a child's perspective of being caught in a trauma tornado. Patrick started talking about that, which then morphed into learning the truth about his grandparents' adoption of him.
I believe it was a matter of weeks. I know she was found fast. She was found the next morning by a local minister that was walking his dog. The dog actually found her body. From what I was told, they didn't really ever talk to me about it. My grandma passed away when I was 14. She passed away of cancer. So she never really talked to me about it. And me and my step grandpa weren't close because by then it was at her funeral that my dad told me why he wasn't around. I was led to believe that it was his choice because work was so hectic. I always felt like he didn't want me and that's why he did it. And it turned out all it was is, he took it hard. Like I said, he loved her up until every day of his life, up until 3 or 4 years ago when he passed away. He went through depression and some drug use and buried himself at work when it first happened, which, I mean, when your life gets torn out from underneath you in a phone call, who wouldn't fall apart? And they used that as an excuse. That's what I was always told, is he was hooked on drugs, so they didn't want me with him. And once he was able to talk to me, it was like a couple months of his grieving process. And had I been there, and he never spoke ill of them, but I mean, when you lose your wife one night and your son at the same time.
That's cruel.
Yeah.
And that should be his decision when he's old enough to make it.
No, because he was a truck driver. They didn't like him. So then they pay him off. They don't really tell him why his dad's not around. He's just a busy truck driver.
He just thought his dad didn't.
Yeah. And then they adopted him.
As a grandparent or anybody in that situation, how do you not stop and think, what's this going to be like 13 years from now when he legally gets to know everything?
What will his perspective
because
be?
You're risking the chance of being cut out of his life.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why people don't think about that more.
Yeah, they go so hard with, I know what's best.
When it's like, no, you don't. You're seeing one side. How dare you make that decision?
Yeah. At just 5 years old, Patrick lost his mother to a violent attack, then lost his father to judgmental grandparents. It was as he got older that he learned about Bruce's early release, his previous crimes, and the lawsuit that allowed his grandparents the financial ability to pay his father off. As I've said, it's an honor when someone asks you to share the story of their lost loved one. We have been lucky enough to provide a space for Patrick to do so, something that is new for him, as he's still getting comfortable talking about it with people outside of his immediate circle. All these years later, He's still learning how to cope with the loss while growing into someone who knows how to communicate his needs while processing all of it. I asked Patrick what he knew of the lawsuit against the state of Washington.
Somebody had mentioned it, that's how my grandparents got the money, was because I was always told he got out. He was sentenced to 10 years and got out in like 3 or something like that, due to somebody in the parole board messing with something or made a mistake, or there was some sort of mistake on the state's part. They sued the state, won, but everything was sealed because the state didn't want people to know that they could sue the state and hold them liable for. Nobody needs to know that. So I don't even know how much it was. I don't know anything that was pertaining to that is sealed so deep. I've never been able to find it. And there's been a lot of things that I couldn't find, which is what made me reach out to you guys. That and hearing how well you guys treat a story and how you tell the story. You guys are the first people I've trusted with it, other than, family and, other people that I've talked to about it. Without people like you and without the story, like you said, eventually people, when the last time somebody speaks your name, and that's something I've never wanted to happen. So I've been very choosy on who I talked to about it growing up. It was very hard for me to talk about it. For me, it's been basically the last 3 years that I've been able to very freely discuss it. And that is in a huge part to my fiance, who she is also a huge fan of yours. She's actually she's who turned me on to the podcast, and I started listening to it. And she took it upon herself when not long after we first met, that she did her own research to find the story, because it's hard to ask questions. So she did a lot of her own work on it. And we can, without judging up and having it be a painful conversation, we can sit and talk about it. Or if I'm having a bad night or a bad day, I can very freely and openly rely on her and talk to her, and she's there. And she knows that I'm going to have days that I'm not perfect, that I'm not at my best. We were kind of going through this today. Nerves have been rough. And I was like, after we get done, I may need to go down and go to the bar and have a drink and talk to the guys and just not sit and think about it for a little bit. And her response was, I would understand that. So it's finally having the support. In my early years, I was married when I was 22. Kind of the backlash of how I went through everything. I wasn't a great husband. I had horrible anxiety if she went out to a bar with her, even with her aunt, and she got home an hour late or didn't call like she said she would. I would turn into an anxiety mess, and I'd start blowing her phone up and losing my mind, which made her feel that I was putting a thumb on her and not letting her live. And I still have it. It comes and goes. It's now we have a son that is the same age I was when I lost my mom. So Sunday we went to a candlelight vigil for the neighbor. Being in that atmosphere and thinking about, and nobody should have this thought or fear, but all of a sudden it hit me that this could be my family that's on the receiving end of a vigil, or it could be me, or it could be my son, and it was a gut punch. That was a rough night, because it just all of a sudden was this overwhelming, like a cloud ran over. It's like, ugh. So I still battle, but the battle's getting better. I don't know that it'll ever 100% go away, especially as the world seems to be getting worse and worse and worse.
Speaking of having a son, it had me wondering if Patrick's experience as a child, not just his mother's death, but how it was handled with silence and stifled emotions, if all of that changed his perspective when approaching parenting his son, who is now the age he was when he lost his mother.
Yes. We handle things 180 degrees different than what my grandparents did. We're open with him, not to the point of fear. We keep it age appropriate, but he did go with us to the vigil. I have talked to him, and he does know that my mom was, because he asks, about grandma and grandpa. And, I've told him that my mother was taken away from me when I was his age, his grandma. But I still choose to bring her up to him, tell him what stories I have. Talk to him about I lost my dad 4 years ago, and I show him pictures of Grandpa Bill, and I talk about him like they were just here yesterday. So when I'm gone, he has a memory of Grandma anyways.
Though he has limited memories of his mother, Patrick has some favorite stories he likes to share with his son, which he was gracious enough to share with us.
We were heading to meet my dad for lunch, and we had one of those old screen doors that the screen was more like expanded metal that was razor sharp. And she was carrying me on her hip, and she did horrible with blood. And she scraped my shin bone on the metal grate, and I started bleeding. So she wrapped me up, threw me in the car seat to get me to my dad. And I was a escape artist at best, and I unhooked my car seat. And somebody forced her to hit the brakes, and I broke my nose on the back of the front seat in front of me. So then she was even more scared.
Because now you're bleeding from two places.
And I remember my dad telling me that story, and I don't remember the car part, but I remember my ankle. And that night she was so worried or traumatized from the day that she put her bottom dresser drawer on the floor and lined it with blankets, and let me sleep on her side of the bed on the floor or in a dresser drawer because Dad would not let me sleep in the bed. Dad didn't want me in the bed because he was always scared he'd roll over on me. So that was why there was no kids in the bed. I could lay there while he was at work, but I had to go in my own room when he got home. So she was like, well, he's going to come home, so just put him in a dresser drawer and it'll be fine. She would always lay there and scratch my head to put me to sleep. To this day, I can make it about 5 minutes through somebody using their nails to massage my head, and I'm out.
What are some words you would use to describe your mother?
Beautiful, thoughtful, funny. My dad said she always had a great zest for life, and that she did the belly dancing, and she liked experiencing new things. She loved spending time outside. A lot of the flash memories I have are of us at a lake. We'd go to the lake right by our house and go swimming a lot. We'd sit outside a lot and sunbathe. She loved being outside and listening to music and reading. Other than the battle she was having with substance abuse, I've never heard anybody that said anything negative about her. I mentioned before I have a half brother. His mom kind of, in a way, stepped up for me as I got older. When I got married the first time, she walked me down the aisle because I was battling. We were going through the wedding planning, and we're talking about who's walking who down the aisle, and it hit me. I'm like, guess I'm just rolling solo. And I was talking to her about that, and she said, I'll walk with you and your dad. So I still talk to her, and she tells me stories. She knew my mom. And even though she was my dad's ex-wife, she still said that she loved my mom and hanging out with her. And she considered themselves friends and does to this day. So that says a lot. And in a weird way, that has helped mold me as an adult, too. My current fiance drives truck for my ex-wife. I help work at the shop, and we actually are very close friends. She comes up to the house for dinner and hangs out and plays with our son. And
I then asked a question Patrick has heard many times before. If he could go back and change things, would he?
I try to live with the thought that if she was here today, she'd be proud of what I'm doing. You know, the cliche that people ask, well, if you could have her back, would you do it? And for me, that is a very difficult question to answer. The logic would always say, yeah, I would have loved to grow up with my mom. But the reality of it, if you change that moment in my life, you change everything I've done with my life since then. I could have grown up to be a crappy human being. You know, I could have grown up to be some weird entitled guy that, you never know. The person that I am today and the father I can be for my son and the partner I can be for my fiance is based on what I went through growing up.
Something Patrick would change would be his contact with the victim from the 1980 attack. They engaged in conversation once online when she posted on a forum, but he has since lost touch with her. Patrick has her first and last name. In my own research, I was unable to find any trace of Jeanette F. In doing the math, she would be about 62 years old now. I'm not sure if she is still in the Pacific Northwest or if she even uses that name. But if you know Jeanette, or maybe you are her, please email us at murderintherain@gmail.com so we can connect you with Patrick.
I've got the world's biggest hug saved up in me that I just want to hold her. And I'm so happy that she made it and she's here. She reached out to me once. I was probably 10 years ago. I was looking through a website because they keep moving in prisons. They keep taking them out of the maximum security that is Walla Walla State Penitentiary, and they keep moving them to Airway Heights, which is basically like a prisoner farm. And then he gets shuffled back and forth. I kind of watch out for it because they're not the best at letting us know when that happens. And there was a form on a website that she reached out to a comment that I made asking if I was okay. And now I can't find the website, and I don't know enough of her name to try to find her on social media or any of that, and in hopes if you can find the other woman or we find a name, I might be able to find her, and, hopefully she still lives locally.
Patrick then spoke about updates he has heard about his mother's killer.
I haven't really heard much until COVID, and I got a call from somebody at the Department of Corrections through the advocacy people that he was actually on a list to be released because of overcrowding of the prison system with COVID. The governor was actually going to let him, he was on a list of potential people to be released because of the amount of time he's been incarcerated and his age. There was a metric they used in Washington State. I heard the number they let out over 100 violent criminals because of how old they were and how long they'd been incarcerated. They figured they deemed him as no longer a threat. And my response to him was, if you let him out, he will do it again. And I said, furthermore, if you let him out, I want to know the day and time, because I'll shoot him inside the prison gate. And the lady was like taken back from it. And I said, the state made me a promise, life without the possibility of parole. If you can't keep up your promise, I will. He only escaped the death penalty by one vote. It was 11-1. It blew my mind. I was like...
So they changed their mind. Was that based off of your conversation?
I'm guessing so.
Now that you're on all sorts of lists.
That comment might be why it's so hard for me to get in and see him. But what do you say when you get that phone call? I honestly figured when I saw who it was, because I got a phone call, I missed it, I got a voicemail, and I returned the call. I actually kind of had hopes. I was like, maybe he finally died in prison. They're calling to let me know he's gone. And then it was that. I was like, excuse me, what?
And that's not even parole.
No,
that's just, you're done, you're out.
Sorry about your luck, go ahead.
I'm glad they didn't go through with it.
Unfortunately, they did, and I feel for all those victims and their families and for whatever they did.
I couldn't find the exact number from Washington State specifically, but COVID did have a major impact on prisons and jails. Most jails sat empty as requirements for arrest were lessened to keep the population, thus the spread of the disease, smaller. This was not done just to protect prisoners. From February 2020 through February 2021, 196 correctional staff of jails and prisons died from COVID. In all, almost half the states, 24 to be exact, released prisoners earlier than their sentence deemed. In that year, 37,700 inmates were released under these circumstances, according to the Bureau of Justice. It's frustration with the legal system, those early releases as a good example, and the exploitative nature of media that has led Patrick to be wary to tell his story. Here, he gives more detail.
I think a lot of what went wrong with why I don't trust a lot of the news stories with like the unemployment and this and that is, I think the news at that time was trying to add one more body to Ridgeway. So whatever the narrative was that told that story. And there's been a few articles. I found one on the Seattle Times that a person wrote in mid-90s, I believe, that he actually referenced. He interviewed Bruce. But the story was on what it's like to be serving life. He didn't mention my mom or why he was serving life, just that, here's what the day in the life of a person serving life in Walla Walla State Penitentiary. And like, I read the story and it was like, almost like they're trying to be sympathetic. And it's like, he's alive. He gets to watch TV, get meals cooked for him, do everything whatever he wants to do except for walk outside. He's why he's there. Don't feel sorry for him. He made the choice. Not once, but twice, that we know of, possibly more.
For the record, there is no proof showing Bruce Bushey has been involved in any other incidents aside from the known cases. The article Patrick is referencing is a Seattle Times piece from January 27, 1992, titled A Sentence That Never Ends, Inmates Know Monotony, by Ronald K. Fitton. At the time, Bruce was housed in Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla with cellmate Lauren Pierce, a man who was serving at least 10 years for the stabbing death of his girlfriend, Linda Maureen McGinley. At the time, Bruce was housed in Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla with cellmate and fellow murderer Lauren Pierce. The article talks about the daily routine of a prisoner, showing skin to the guard as a roll call, spending 12 hours a day in a cell. This is a portion of the article that talks specifically with and about Bruce. Bushey slowly rolls over and sits on the edge of the bed, his head bowed. This is where he spends at least 12 hours of each day. Inside this 108-square-foot cage behind these cold steel bars are the basics of his world. A state-owned stainless steel sink, a state-owned stainless steel toilet, a state-owned steel bunk bed, a state-owned steel footlocker, a state-owned plastic glass mirror, a state-owned wooden table. Bushey is one of the state's most dangerous criminals. In the darkness of this early morning, his slow-motion movements and the strain on his face reveal what he is also fast becoming, a tired man who appears much older than his 41 years. His yawn is non-threatening, the early morning stir of a man half awake. When he stretches his arms, there is no danger, and his bowed head doesn't appear to be searching the darkness of the cell for a victim.
I'm sorry, everybody looks sweet when they're sleepy.
As if this type of man is...
He's the most dangerous.
Constantly in predator mode.
I know.
Never has
yourself.
A moment of...
They're so into them, like, I gotta write this clever little article with my fancy words.
Yeah, or he's been presented as such a monster. Yeah.
There's a fucking reason.
You realize those people don't walk around like that all the time, right? They'd be caught.
We all have different sides of our personality. Do you think I'm walking around asking for spankings when I get up in the morning? No. But do I do it? Yeah. Sometimes I do.
Sometimes.
Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm at work. Like, oh, I did that wrong. You better spank
me.
Come on.
He is simply gathering himself, trying to prepare himself for another long, monotonous day. Slowly, it becomes clear that this man, whose anger and rage and uncontrolled passions left others victimized and vanquished and ultimately dead, is disintegrating from the consequences of those brutal actions. It is also clear that this man, at this early morning hour, is simply preparing himself for a cup of coffee and a cigarette. It is very likely that Bushey will awaken behind these bars with the words, "Gotta see some skin," penetrating his eardrums for the rest of his life. The slow, second-by-second routine of another slow, second-by-second routine day dominates Bushey's mind. He and the other lifers without rarely think of the weeks, months, and years ahead. To look too far into the future is to look too far into their limitations. It is to risk having to face this fact: Walla Walla is going to be their world forever. Quote, "It's hard to deal with the concept that I'm going to be here for the rest of my natural life," Bushey says, puffing on a cigarette inside his cell. "It's hard to conceive in my mind the kind of time that I'm looking at. I have no reference points." In the harsh world of Walla Walla, time is indeed relative. For lifers without, it is final and irrevocable. And lifers without, people like Bruce Bushey, understand this damnation of time like no others. Quote, "All of us lifers without parole sit here day after day with a sentence that doesn't have an end. I can go on living for 10 years, 20 years, 30 or 40 years, Bushey says. His voice rises. A sudden twitch appears above the left side of his mouth. Beads of sweat dot his forehead. He takes a long drag on his cigarette and without looking flicks the butt into the stainless steel toilet inside his cell, inches below his stainless steel sink and only a few feet from his steel bunk bed. Quote, "Where does it all end? I can't say I'm getting out in the year 2023. And when you stop and think about a sentence and it says 999 years, how can you relate to that? You can't." So Bushey, like other lifers without, rarely thinks about his sentence. He thinks only of the moments, the minutes. His vision of the future is built on a delicately constructed psychological premise that one day he'll be released. It appeared that this article was actually part of a series for that week, which was discussing the good and bad surrounding imprisonment and conditions faced by inmates. Those are good conversations to have. We have them on the show often, but we've come a long way in the over 25 years since that article was written. No one should be treated inhumanely, especially when under government custody. But it seems fairly ridiculous to write a sympathetic article about how monotonous and boring prison is when the man you're speaking with almost killed a teenager while raping her multiple times, then actually killed a young mother after raping her. So that monotonous, brain-rotting redundancy is actually what people hope for when that person receives a lifelong sentence. The following day, the next article was "Conjugal Visits Don't Fit All Notions of Punishment," again by Ronald K. Fitton. Here are some highlights surrounding Bruce. Every 30 days, just as confinement at Walla Walla rankles him, Bruce Bushey, a convicted killer and lifer without parole, meets alone with his wife for 22 hours in an apartment on prison grounds. They talk about family life, the kids, the bills. They might, if they so desire, have sex. About 15% of Walla Walla's 2,200-person prison population, about 330 inmates, use the program. Several are lifers without parole, and the number of participants is expected to increase. Critics say the program is full of contradictions. They cite examples of convicted murderers and rapists, such as Bruce Bushey, who have opportunities to remain intimate with their spouses, even though they're serving life without parole for committing heinous crimes. Others argue it puts too much emphasis on physical aspects of marriage, is unfair to unmarried inmates, and decreases the intensity of punishment. Regarding Bushey and inmates who have committed similar crimes, quote, should a person who took another's life live humanely, have family visits, receive private 22-hour once-a-month apartment visits on prison grounds with spouses, have the right to intimacy, at the state taxpayer's expense?
Especially rapists. No, they shouldn't. I mean, that's my soapbox.
I had not even thought about it, and it made me sick to think part of Patrick's tax-paying money has gone into the system to cover the cost of his mother's murderer to get a 22-hour visit with his wife.
It's disgusting, and it's not allowed. And I agree. Like, if you're going to do that for married ones, why not do it for single ones? And that's why they get married. And it is so wrong to me.
Well, luckily, only California, Washington, New York, and Connecticut have it still.
Well, they're all dumb as hell.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are studies that they're like, oh, they're less violent if they're getting laid. Well, come on, they're in prison.
Right.
They have a hand. Let them do it that way.
I think there's a difference between being humane and being punitive.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you can be humane while being punitive. It's a very volatile issue, said Jerry Davis, a spokesman at Walla Walla. It's a big expense, and the question is whether the citizens of the state are willing to pay for it. Bushey says the family visitation program is the one aspect of his imprisonment that makes him seem alive. For me, this visit is the one time each month I get to go out and be normal, sane, relaxed, and secure, he says. I can interact with my family and be as normal as I possibly can for a short period of time. I'd go crazy if I couldn't.
Well, you know what?
Guess you shouldn't have murdered Barbara.
Honestly, sometimes I'm like all for just get rid of them, but
yeah,
it's
I know.
You see all the innocent people.
Well, it's like we were talking about the parole thing. You want to say, look at these 100 examples of why it should be this, but then there's
and then you go to these lawless places, these states where they're protecting the wrong people.
Yeah,
and these innocent people are in jail for their whole lives. It's very it's a hard one.
Yeah. James Spaulding, director of prisons for the Washington Department of Corrections, said Bushey and other inmates are likely to continue to receive conjugal visits. Quote, we are expected to take these individuals for 40, 50, 60, or 70 years and provide them with the things that they'll need to live, Spaulding says. If we don't and decide to treat them like animals, they'll respond like animals. For some people, the idea of attending a crime con or any similar event seems bizarre. The popularity of true crime is baffling. Who wants to listen to such dark, awful stuff? Which I totally understand. For Patrick, he actually finds comfort in it. Hearing the stories of other victims, survivors, and secondhand victims like himself, well, he knows he's not the only member of this hellish club.
For me, with not having information growing up, I read any book I could find or watch any documentary on basically any serial killer documentary that's out there, trying to see if I try to figure out what was going on through Bushey's head when he did it. And maybe I could understand it or the psychology of it or what. So now having these platforms and being able to hear you guys tell the story, it helps more than a lot of people would think. From the victim standpoint, it helps to hear other people's stories and get insight. And especially the way it was for me growing up, not knowing anything about it. I felt like, am I the only one? Did this only happen to me? And it's just, for some reason, my life sucks. I grew up in kind of a churchy family that everybody used to love that. Well, it was God's plan. Why? What did she do to him? Like, what? Give me facts. Help me with something, not just give me some balloon. Oh, it had to be. No, it didn't.
Once again, I just want to say it was so lovely getting to work with Patrick. He has been so patient in my taking forever to get to his mother's story. He has been so patient since I interviewed him in the fall, but he was willing to wait so we could talk about Barbara's case and the Green River connection, along with Emily's stories, so that it kind of painted a really big picture of what was going on at the time. For a man that has every right to be bitter, cruel, angry at the world, Patrick has been nothing but kind and calm, even when talking about the person who took his mother away from him when he needed her most. So I thank Patrick for being so brave and vulnerable as to tell his story and his mother's story so that he could keep his mother's name alive.
Just a huge thank you to all three of you guys again. And I couldn't be happier that we're doing this and sad at the same time. And that's a lot of why I want to do this too, is just to keep it out there. Because a lot of times if you just Google her name and look at it, it does. The first thing that comes up is the correlation between Ridgway and Bushey. And it's like, no, that's didn't know each other.
When I asked Patrick if he had a call to action besides sharing his mother's story and getting that information out there, he said that he had two charities that he wanted to share with you guys. One is Ducks Unlimited 2, which he works with for land conservation and to keep parks and recreation spaces open and clean and safe. So if you would like to donate to that in Patrick's name or in Barbara's name or for anyone else that you love. He also asked that I share information on a local safe space for LGBTQIA2S plus victims of violent crimes so that they have places to go for resources and safety. I could go through a list of Washington locations or Seattle locations that support the LGBTQIA2S plus community, but that'd be a long list. Secondly, I think because of how Patrick said, he said he wanted something local and he wants his mother's legacy to be one of love and moving forward and growing. So I implore you, listener, to look up your local resource for LGBTQIA2S plus community members and find a shelter or a location that fits what you are looking to donate to, and to make that donation, even just a couple of dollars. I think the idea of picturing $5 from every person that's listening going into a community service like that across the nation, across the world, really, is like seeing a bunch of seeds laid out from Barbara and letting them grow into love and support, which is what Patrick's trying to continue to carry on in his mother's name. This person that was in his life for a very short time, but whose impact has never lessened.
All right. Well, you guys take care too, and thank you again.
Yes, you too. Yes.
We love you.
Oh, thank you.
I had my fangirl moment.
He's been sitting so good. You want to say hi? You can say hi.
Hi. Thank you for your help. From February 2020 through February 2021. From February 2020 through February 2021. February. His yawn is non-threatening. The early morning. Patrick explained that there was a holdup on getting a visit with Bruce, and he doesn't have... that it all started to make sense that the case would have been given to the Green River Task Force, mumble mouth, to share with his son, which he was gracious enough to share with us. Did I snort? And it looked like that would... Murder in the Rain is a Cascade Media production, written, hosted, and edited by Josh McCullough, Emily Rowney, and Alicia Holland. Feel free to email us at murderintherain@gmail.com or through our website, murderintherain.com. For as little as $1 a month, you can subscribe on Patreon to get exclusive access to ad-free and older episodes. For only $5, you can access Patreon-exclusive episodes and content. For more of us, be sure to follow on all the socials, listen to Josh and Alicia on their other show, Always Be My Sisters, and follow Emily on TikTok at @M_murderintherain. And suck my balls.